Hello, I'm William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and today is Saturday night, and I look might look a little dirty because I was out working on the farm today and spent the day as I was working and doing some garden work. I was going back and forth in a discussion with a transgender activist, and I went through the discussion for quite a while today, and I think it was productive because I like to work through these discussions, not so much because I think I'm going to cause such a person to change their mind, although with God's grace it's possible, and it's only possible through the instrument of preaching. That's what St. Paul teaches us in Romans chapter 10. But I also engage in these discussions so that I can really follow the lines of argument and see where they lead. And usually important issues arise as I follow through with these discussions. And in my discussion today, a number of important issues did arise that I think are helpful in understanding the problems with this worldview, this transgender worldview. And the reason why I wanted to talk about it tonight was because I wanted to do so while the discussion was fresh in my mind, because I think that some of the things that I observed will be appreciated and helpful to those who pay attention to the talks that I post. So what happened today was there was a woman in politics in Montana. I don't know much about her. That's irrelevant, so don't worry about that. But there was a politician in Montana, and she was talking about this issue of transgenderism, I guess we'll call it. And she said that she had a daughter who actually, went through this and tried to identify as a male or whatever. And the mother, this politician, this woman, she opposed her daughter, and it caused a lot of difficulty in their relationship, to the point where this daughter of hers, who we'll assume she was a teenager, I'm not really sure, but let's assume she was a teenager. She got to the point where she started to try to bully her mother with threats that she was going to kill herself. And, if her mother didn't support her in this, and if her mother didn't go along with her, she'd kill herself. And her mother said that this went on for 3 years, this threatening suicide. And so the mother, talking about this situation, explains how she refused to be bullied emotionally by her daughter, and she would pray about it. She didn't know what to do. The situation was very confusing and complicated for her. But she felt that and she articulates this very clearly, though everyone ignores the details that she shares. She said that she did not believe that her daughter at that point in her life was ready or capable of making a decision on that matter. And as a parent, she felt it was her obligation to direct her daughter to make the right decision with her long-term happiness in view. And so she talked about how she wrestled with the issue and she prayed about it, and finally she was faced with this dilemma that was whether it was better for her to resist her daughter and keep her as she is, or I should say, allow her to live in this transition state and sort of go along with it, or refuse to go along with it, have the child commit suicide, and then live with a dead child. And she said that at that point in time, she felt that it would be better for her to live with a dead child than to allow herself to support the child in this. And when she said that, if you listen to what she's saying, and you're respectful to what she's trying to express, and you understand she's speaking hypothetically, the child's not dead. The child did not commit suicide. None of this happened, and so a lot of this fake outrage, it doesn't even make any sense now that it's over. But she was speaking figuratively or hypothetically, saying, at that time, I felt it was my duty to resist my daughter and not worry about the threat of her, killing herself or doing something destructive. And that's what she said. And then this transgender community got a hold of that talk, or I think even a couple different places where she's told that story and explained that feeling and that dilemma. And now they're trying to crucify this lady for, what she said, that she would rather have a dead, whatever, than a, living transgender or this or that. So this person was sharing that video and reacting to that video, and I decided to take up a challenge and get into a discussion about that. Now, the first thing, and the key in all of this is that these transgender people are really crazy. They're not thoughtful, they're not intelligent, they're not careful, they're not reasonable, they're not, and it's important for us to point that out and to demonstrate that, not only to them as individuals, but to people who follow them, read their stuff, and so on. It's important for us to point out and reveal the insanity that is present in the minds of these people. And it just takes a little bit of digging before it starts to come out. And that's what I intended to do, to try and get this person into a public discussion. Because of people reading and seeing these posts, following these discussions, I wanted them to see just how crazy this person is, and that this isn't a real objection to anything said at all. It's just an act. It's just fake political outrage for the sake of attention. So what I did was I started to ask this person about what exactly she was saying. Is she saying that the mother did something wrong, or the mother should have done something different, and so on? First of all, I said the mother didn't say she would have been pleased if her child killed herself. That's obviously not what was said. And I raised the first question was, if we think about this situation, we have a transgender person threatening suicide. So the person who's identifying as transgender is not a mentally stable person. Rather than championing this transgender person as if she's some kind of philosopher who's, worked out all the details and thought through all these things and is stable and responsible and thinking clearly, we're talking about a girl who's threatening to kill herself. That's the kind of person who's identifying as a transgender person. Somehow the mother is being criticized because the daughter is threatening to kill herself, when there's only one person who's worthy of criticism in this situation, and it's this nutcase who's threatening to kill herself. So the fact that it's a suicide who's claiming to be transgender is sort of strike one for the transgender crowd. Your group members are crazy people who threaten to kill themselves. So this mother has to deal with this kind of a person. The mother hasn't done anything wrong. The only person who's done anything wrong is this girl who is threatening to kill herself because she wants to identify as a boy. So we talked about that for a while, and I pointed that out, that suicide, in at least for me as a Catholic, is intrinsically evil, unconditionally evil, and therefore that girl is at fault for even considering suicide, because it would make no sense to say, if you don't support me in this, I'm going to completely destroy my entire life. That's not a reasonable position. And yet somehow the mother turned out to be the bad guy in this story, rather than the self-destructive suicide. So that was the first issue. Then once I identified myself as a Catholic, the wheels came off the bus, because, this lady chose to do what everyone does, and this was actually helpful for the discussion. She found out I was a Catholic and immediately started talking about sex abuse in the church and all this kind of stuff, and how these abuses lead to suicide and all this kind of stuff. And, before I even get into that, I always want to say thanks to the clergy for making public discussion about the Catholic faith next to impossible because of all of these perverted sex abuse cases. Lay people who are actually engaged in evangelization and these kinds of discussions have almost no chance, humanly speaking, to make any progress because of the filth that's associated with the Catholic Church. And, it's really unfortunate because there's so much good in the Catholic faith to be shared, and we've got this wall set up in our work of evangelizing as lay people by the clergy who've created this gigantic mess that we have to deal with. And it takes real surgical care and tons of time to try and navigate through this mess. But it's actually helpful in these discussions because this lady, starts to talk about the sexual abuse cases in the church and how Catholics are pedophiles, and we allow for these child molesters and all this kind of stuff. So what I did was, realizing how insane it is for a lady who's promoting, transgenderism, to pick on Catholics because of sexual abuses. I said, first of all, let's just make a few things clear. One of the reasons why these abuse scandals happened in the church was because the church chose to listen to this message of showing empathy towards homosexuals and admitted homosexuals into the clergy, and those homosexuals, some of them at least, committed these abuses. So before you start, slamming the sexual abuse in the Catholic Church as a representative of the LGBTQ, etc. Crowd, realize that these priests who actually did these things were members of your society. So you might want to pump the brakes on this attack on the sex abuse cases in the church, because they were primarily homosexual in nature. So that's not a route you're going to want to take. That's a bad argument for the LGBTQ crowd. So I decided to ask her. I asked, what exactly are you saying is wrong with pedophilia? Because I knew that she was going to get trapped. She already set the trap around her own feet by blasting the Catholic Church. So I said, what exactly are you willing to say is wrong with pedophilia? And then she tried to attack me personally, arguing that I actually support child molesting and don't care about these things. How dare I, promote, just nonsense. And I said, what I'm asking for is an explanation of how, with your moral system, which I think is just a bunch of chaos that really can't even be articulated, how would this moral system that you claim to have as a proponent of transgenderism, how would it condemn, by what principle would it condemn a pedophile, right? On what? And so, she argued that pedophilia is bad because it involves the abuse of children, and it's illegal. It's illegal for adults to have relations with children, and therefore, since it's illegal, I hope that you can see as soon as these people start to talk, if you get into the discussion, all of the red flags start popping up, and the self-contradictions, the insanity all starts to unfold. And that's, like I said, the purpose of these discussions is to just let these people unravel real time and pay attention to the craziness that comes out of their mouths. So she's explaining that, well, pedophilia is illegal. Sex between an adult and a minor is illegal. And these are literally, she said, children can be manipulated by adults, and that's why pedophilia is dangerous. So when it's time for her to argue against someone she doesn't like, she's willing to argue that children are vulnerable and that they can be manipulated by adults, and that's why they should be off limits. Now realize this is a discussion that started with a girl who wanted to identify as transgender and go ahead and pursue the actual changing of her sex. A child. So that child that she was defending as a transgender child was apparently, mature and capable of making her own decisions and free to act without, the consent of her parent. Now she turns around with this, this insane, contradictory mind, and she's literally telling me that children cannot be allowed to make these kinds of decisions for themselves with reference to having sex with an adult, because they're easily manipulated by adults and therefore vulnerable. She said that. So so there's ridiculous self-contradiction number one. So we dove into that a little bit more, and I said, well, obviously, in your moral system, you're going to say now that a child is not capable of consenting to have sex with an adult. But does your moral system forbid children to have sex with other children? There are minors who are active sexually. Does your LGBTQ moral system condemn sex among minors? Because they're not capable of consenting. You just explained this. You just explained that children are easily manipulated and vulnerable, and they can't consent because. So, if that's true between a child and an adult, is that also true between a child and another child? And what I asked was, do you believe that to have sex with another child is safer in some way than to have sex with an adult? Is that what you're arguing? Because, obviously the LGBTQ crowd is not going to argue for, chastity in childhood. Give us a break, right? So I use this criticism of pedophilia to get into, what exactly is the moral principle that you're arguing here? And so this LGBTQ lady, goes ahead and argues, for this, just spitefully for herself, argues that it's wrong for children to have sex with other children. Great, that's great. So I started to make a list of all of the different, principles or moral, commandments, I called them, being kind of sarcastic. The commandments that she conceded in our discussion. So the first one was that, like, it's wrong for a parent to allow a child to commit suicide. That's a commandment. You shall not allow a child to commit suicide. It's wrong for an adult to to have sexual relations with a child. And it's also wrong for children to have sexual relations with each other. So I started collecting these rules. Then the next point that I raised as the discussion went on is that if you think about the original argument, it was pretty interesting, because this lady is claiming to be morally outraged at the idea that a mother would allow her daughter to commit suicide. And my next question was, if you're morally outraged at the idea that a mother would allow her daughter to commit suicide, and of course I knew the answer to this question, but I just asked for the sake of discussion. I said, do you also oppose abortion? Because, in abortion, a mother doesn't merely allow a child to kill itself. A mother actively kills a child. I mean, that seems way worse than allowing a child to commit suicide. I mean, allowing a child to do something is one thing. Being the one who actually does it, man, that would have to be much worse if the first case was bad. And so she refused to comment on abortion because, she knew that she was really stuck, because the discussion was already getting ridiculous by this point. And she had already conceded things that made her look foolish, and other people were starting to comment on the discussion and things like that, and saying that. But I asked her, I kept pressing her about abortion, because these crazy people will promote unconditional abortion. You can get abortion simply because you don't want a child. You can get abortion because your child's mentally handicapped. And I pointed that out, that they run tests and things, prenatal testing, to try and predict likelihood of future physical or mental disabilities. And women are counseled in light of the results of those tests to consider abortion to avoid those difficulties. So, anybody who supports abortion is perfectly fine with a mother killing a child because she thinks the child might be poor. These social justice warriors who claim to love the poor so much have no problem killing them through abortion. So a mother is allowed to kill a poor child, or a child who is expected to be poor. That's okay. A mother is allowed to kill a child who she learns might be physically handicapped. So we kill the handicapped through abortion. That's okay. We can allow women to kill mentally handicapped children if they learn of problems before birth. That would be okay. So it's okay for mothers to actively kill, and this is considering the intention in the abortion and the reason given to justify the abortion. It's okay to kill the poor. It's okay for a mother to kill the physically handicapped. It's okay for the mother to kill the mentally handicapped, and whatever other conditions you want to give. It's all right to kill any person who gets in the way of a woman's career, or whatever the reasons are that are given. All of those reasons are justified in abortion. But if a mother resists a child over transgenderism, and the child threatens to kill herself, that's unacceptable. That seems like a real contradiction. So then the discussion of abortion started, and she started with, abortion is not a living child. So that was the next issue. Abortion, is the destruction of a fetus, and a fetus is not a living child. So I went to the Oxford English Dictionary, and I got a definition of fetus. And the definition of fetus in the Oxford English Dictionary, which is the English dictionary, the definition of a fetus is an unborn offspring. Let me just make sure of that real quick here. I'll just get that definition because I still have it on my screen here. I think I do. No, I don't. But it's something like that, like the unborn offspring is a fetus. Okay, so that's the definition of a fetus in the Oxford Dictionary. And I asked her if she would concede that definition, the unborn offspring. And she wouldn't answer. And I had to ask like 5 times as she tried to get into all of these other discussions, tried to, attack me for supporting pedophiles again. She tried to raise the question of circumcision and this is another point that's worth talking about, which I'll try to remember to get to in a minute. But I asked her again and again to stay on topic and answer my question so we could talk about this abortion question. And obviously we have to define the term fetus. Oxford English Dictionary provides us with a definition, and she agreed to go along with this definition of an unborn offspring. Okay, so I said, great, we've got a definition now. A fetus is an unborn offspring. Well, this assumes the definition of the term offspring. So we looked up offspring, and the definition of offspring is children or progeny. So So we're back to a fetus is, the definition of a fetus is an unborn child. So the fetus is an unborn child, okay? Then she raised 4 issues to try to catch me in some kind of contradiction. One of the problems with these discussions is because the conservative Christian political crowd makes so many logical errors, so many self-defeating arguments and actions, that they raise these problems as arguments against me when I don't agree with those things. So I have to deal with all of this this modern Christian political junk. So she raises questions like why doesn't the government recognize an unborn child as a human being? And so I had to explain all that mess, that actually you're wrong because Roe versus Wade was overturned, and what that means is that our government doesn't actually say anything on this issue. They defer it to the states, and half of the states have abortion as illegal in them. So to say that our government doesn't recognize a human being, an unborn child as a human being, is false. It would be true of all of those states that allow abortion, but half the states, at least, I don't know what the status of that is because it's always changing, but around half of the states are holding abortion to be illegal and do recognize the life of an unborn child. So that argument was false. It would have worked in the Roe v. Wade era because our federal government did in fact argue that anyone could abort a child without, no matter what the state said. So that would have been true, but Roe v. Wade being overturned ends any appeal to the government as support for abortion. Secondly, she argued why are life insurance plans available for unborn children? If unborn children are human beings, why can't there be life insurance plans for unborn children? She thought that was a clever argument. And I said, because the insurance companies know that their mothers will kill them because they're allowed to kill them. So it would make no sense to insure unborn children when the states allow the mothers to kill those children, right? So what are you going to do? Have an abortion clause in the life insurance policy that in the event that the mother chooses to kill the child, obviously it makes no sense in a pro-abortion society to insure unborn children. So that's obviously a ridiculous argument. Then she argued that child support laws in our country don't require the father of the child to provide for the mother while she's pregnant. And it's really funny to me because these people, these LGBTQ, morally liberal people, they support all of this immoral activity, like children having sex, even though they'll deny it, in self-contradiction in a discussion because they realize that if they approve that, then, those same children might be consenting to sexual relations with an adult. Well, you got to deny that, and in order to deny that, you have to deny all sexual activity among minors. So they'll go ahead and do it. They'll go ahead and say that they believe that no minors should be sexually active, which of course they don't believe. But they support all this whole moral culture, this immoral society that creates all of these dilemmas, and then they use these dilemmas to argue against Christian morals as if these moral dilemmas are like natural and inevitable. Their moral system created the context where all of these moral evils exist, and now they use the consequences of their own ways as arguments against Christians, as if those situations would even exist if Christian morals were practiced. So it's just wacky how they do that. But anyway, so let's just think about this argument here. She's arguing that our government doesn't require a man to pay child support for an unborn child. Now, there's already, this moral craziness assumed in this. Why would I have to pay child support to my unborn child unless the child was in the womb of a woman who I wasn't with as a husband? So it's the assumption of this anti-Christian immoral society that's creating these dilemmas in the first place, and then they're going to try to use these dilemmas as attacks against Christians, which is just nutsy. But anyway, so she argued that our government doesn't require men to provide child support to unborn children, and therefore that shows somehow that unborn children don't have human rights. And so first of all, I pointed out that this whole moral situation where we have women carrying children that belong to men who aren't actually their husbands is, contradicted by our moral teaching, which is a coherent system for an entire moral life, and that, she would likely, in her normal moral teaching, argue that, sex outside of marriage is not necessarily evil. So now, well, here we're dealing with a consequence of sex outside of marriage, and we're going to pretend that this is evil. And now it's like, well, what are you going to do about it? Well, that's what we're talking about when we talk about there not being sex outside of marriage. We're already trying to prevent this problem. But, the people who hate Christian morals are the ones arguing for it. And now we've got this dilemma, and now you're going to pretend it's the government's fault that this problem exists and it's not dealt with in the best. So that's a mess, and I made it clear that this is a consequence of your moral ideas, and you're trying to bill. And this is what they do. They want to have their moral freedom, but they want to bill all of the undesirable consequences of that moral system to Christian people, because ultimately we're the ones that have to pay for it. The people who teach against it. And the other thing I explained was that it's actually not true that our government believes that men should not provide child support for unborn children. In fact, the pro-life politicians that she hates so much are arguing that unborn children should be provided for by child support laws, and that women shouldn't have to bear the expenses of pregnancy by themselves without the help of the father of the child. It's the pro-life people who are actually arguing to try to help those mothers and make the men take care of the children. So again, the men that she's going to condemn in one breath, she's now looking for as saviors to what about that? It's just this moral craziness. It just gets deeper and deeper as you dig. So that was dealt with. And then we eventually got back to this discussion of pedophilia, where she tries to argue that pedophilia is wrong. Pedophiles are not accepted to the lesbian, bisexual, gay, transgender, and queer society. Somehow the pedophiles get left out because these poor kids can't consent to sexual activity. They can consent to abortion. They can consent to sex before marriage with minors, which is crazy if you think about it. They can consent to changing their gender. They can consent to taking hormone treatments to change the function of their bodies. They're able to even choose these gender change surgeries, which I saw there's a hospital in Boston, proudly advertising their gender surgeries for minors and all this they're going to be arguing for all of this power to be given to minors to make all of these decisions about their sexuality, their this, their that, their abortions, and enormously significant decisions. And yet somehow this one decision is just beyond them. We're gonna protest against this. And again, it just reveals the insincerity. That's one thing that I kept pointing out to her, is that, arguments that she and people from her crowd make, they're just not sincere. You're not serious about these things. There's no principles in what you say. And you're just rambling in this chaos where whatever is convenient for you at the moment, that becomes your argument. And it's like a child throwing a tantrum anytime she doesn't get her way. There's no reason or principle behind it. It's just constantly changing, self-contradicting chaos that happens to isolate one group of people and say they're bad, but everyone else who practices, different practices, but the same principle, they're okay. But this one, we're going to reject this one just so we can have an appearance of having some kind of, moral conscience. We're not totally crazy. We never let any pedophiles in here. And this is the problem. It's just not a serious position. Now, I mentioned circumcision before because this was interesting. Just so you're aware of an argument that she tried to make. When I argued against this idea of having surgeries to change people's gender, I argued, obviously, I'm against that. Obviously, the Catholic faith doesn't support going to a doctor and having him cut your breasts off and change your genitalia. So what she tried to do, she tried to make the argument that Christians actually already allow for this because of the practice of circumcision. And I thought, wow, this is an interesting line of argument. So you're trying to argue that circumcision, where we surgically alter genitalia, circumcision is comparable to a sex change operation. And if circumcision is acceptable, then, if you're allowed to cut this off, well, why can't you cut this off? Why can't you cut the breast off or whatever, So you can see that this transgender crowd is going to try to use circumcision as sort of a trap for Christians to get themselves into. And once they say that they admit circumcision, they're going to say, aha, so you do believe it's okay for physicians or surgeons to alter the body according to some idea of sex. So I had to deal with that. And my response to her on that was, whoa. First of all, I said I'm a Catholic. Okay? I'm a Christian. Circumcision was a practice that was developed by the Jews, not by Christians. So just, pump the brakes on this, what you perceive to be a silver bullet here to win this, to win the day. Circumcision is a religious practice, a symbolic religious practice of the Jews, not the Christians, of the Jews. So religiously, it has nothing to do with me. Secondly, in modern society, physicians, and I'm talking about general physicians, secular physicians. Secular physicians normally practice circumcision not for the sake of any religious belief, not because of Judaism, but because they simply argue that it's beneficial for sanitary purposes and health reasons. It's good for hygiene. And so I said, if you're going to talk about circumcision, circumcision is practiced by the Jews and is recommended by secular physicians for the sake of health benefits. I said that has nothing to do with Catholicism or Christianity. And I'm not sure that most Christians would realize that. Do all Christians realize that circumcision is not actually a Christian practice? Circumcision is a symbol of the old covenant, God's covenant with Abraham. That's not an essential for the Christian life. It's practiced by modern physicians based on materialistic health benefits. It's got nothing to do with any Christian position. But she tried to use that as sort of a bridge to go from this surgical procedure, which happens to take place, with genitalia, and bridge from that to, therefore, this other surgical procedure must also be okay. And that argument didn't work for her, because I explained that circumcision has nothing to do with Christianity. So that's a useless argument to make. So anyway, we went back and forth for a while, and the most important thing, I think, is keeping track of keeping track of the commandments of these people. What I kept asking her is, what actually is the moral system that you appeal to? Like, what are the principles? Where can I find this system? And I sort of mocked throughout our discussion how there's no system, there's no principle. It's all these disconnected, contradictory statements and beliefs. And, it was pretty brutally obvious how ridiculous the things were that she was saying. And, all she could do, and we had gone back and forth in this discussion for hours. I mean, it was, I was writing her while I was working, then I came in for dinner and kept the conversation going, and took some time later in the evening to get back to it. But I really wanted to see, what the arguments are, what the line of reasoning is, what the real issues are, because this transgender stuff is becoming more and more central. And, man, it just gets crazier. And, for my own sake, I want to have my thoughts worked out on this and be comfortable in these discussions. And I took the time today to, because I felt that this one lady, I felt that she was pretty sharp, she was pretty intelligent, and I think she was a good representative of that community. And we had a good discussion. It wasn't very good for her. I mean, it was good because I think that I made, as far as human reason is concerned, I think I made some effective points that hopefully stick with her. But it was good in the sense that she was prepared to get into all the issues and sort of reveal to me all of their arguments and all of their tactics in these discussions, and where they think they've got these gotcha arguments for Christian people and Catholic people, and we sort of went through them one by one, and I was able to respond to them pretty effectively, I think, and learn a lot. So just a couple of issues. One was the bizarre argument that the woman who was willing to allow her daughter to kill herself was demonized, whereas abortion mothers are, sanctified or canonized by these crazy people. So that was a bizarre self-contradiction. Then the attempt to attack Catholics because, there are pedophiles in the clergy, without considering the reality that these pedophiles are primarily homosexuals that, should never have been in the clergy in the first place, and were lying about their religion. Somehow that gets charged to the Catholic faith, which makes no sense. So attacking pedophiles when they're members of the LGBTQ community, and then trying to fault the Catholics for showing the empathy to those people that they argue everyone should show them, and then using the consequences as an attack on that's a crazy line of argument. And then being pressed to explain what's wrong with pedophilia, and getting the concession that children can be manipulated and can't consent to these complicated things, and yet the whole transgender movement is arguing about letting children decide. And you see, there's another just glaring self-contradiction. Then getting into all these attempts to argue about abortion, and the insanity of that, making sure we define terms and challenge people to define terms first, because with the abortion argument, defining terms ends the discussion. You can't get around the significance of the definition of the term fetus, first of all. It's unborn offspring. How else are you going to define what it is? It's an unborn offspring, unborn child. That's what it is. And then she initially argued that a fetus is not a living child. Well, if it's not living, let's take up the quality of living. If it's not living, then why do we need to kill it? Why do we need to end its life? Obviously it's living because we need to stop it from living. And not only is it living, but it's progressing towards some end, and we have to intervene to make sure that this end doesn't come about. So any attempt to argue that it's not a living child is just impossible. I mean, as far as living is concerned, it's obviously living. It's not only living, it's developing. It's moving towards perfection as a created being. And we can see that happening, and that's why we've got to act, because we want to interrupt this development. So to argue it's not a living child, obviously it's living. So then it's not a child. Well, then what is it? It's the fruit of sexual relations between two people. I mean, that's what a child is. So, the key here with these arguments is these people aren't serious. These people aren't serious. They're not sincere. And I think if we emphasize with them that they're not taking these discussions seriously, they're not serious about these topics. Like if she brings up some kind of Bible verse or something, I stop her and say, you're not serious about Bible study. You don't study the Bible. So, give us a break. I tell her, stick to things that you actually are comfortable with and familiar with. Don't goof around with the Bible. You don't study the Bible. Don't talk about Catholic teaching. You don't know anything about it. You don't study Catholic teaching. Stick to what you know. So we just can't allow that stuff. But emphasize to these people that you're aware that they don't take this serious, and their self-contradiction, their confusion, the fact that they can't say three things in a row that make any sense, it reveals an insincerity. You're not serious about this. You're not taking this question seriously, because the things you're saying are not even well thought out. And I keep referring with her to the fact that she has there's no moral system behind what she's saying. And if we try to summarize what this moral system might look like, it's just craziness. And we get this list of what I called the commandments that she had, conceded through the discussion, and it's just self-contradictory craziness that anyone can see that she would never agree to. But over the course of the discussion, she has agreed to these things. So just realize that these people, they try to bully. They're very arrogant. They make personal attacks. They try to pretend that they're part of some huge ocean of like-minded people, and they're not. There are very few, hardly any people in the world who actually believe these things. They may say them for the sake of political gain. They may say them for the sake of keeping their job or gaining a client in their work or something like that. They may say it just for the sake of some material benefit, but they're not serious about this topic. And if they're pressed for answers about things, that facade melts and they just sort of unravel into total nonsense. And you've got to be willing to poke around a little bit. But at the same time, I'd recommend that you be careful that when you do so, you realize that these people are coming with prepared arguments. And if you aren't careful in your positions, if you're not careful and you're just repeating things that other Christian political people say and things you've heard and you haven't sincerely thought about themselves, you're going to get trapped and you're going to make a fool of yourself, because that's one of their tactics, is to try to, they've got prepared arguments for the nonsense that comes from political Christians. And if you just repeat stuff you hear from them, you're going to get yourself trapped in one of their arguments. And I think it's a very serious issue to get into a discussion and actually be a source of encouraging one to imagine that they have successfully contradicted the Christian faith. That would scare me, to have to go to bed at night knowing that there was at least one person, maybe many more if others are reading these discussions, where you might have been an instrument in giving them confidence to go on in their unbelief because it appeared to them, because of your incompetence, that the Christian faith can be refuted. That'd be something that I'd take very seriously. And if you're uncertain about your ability to successfully articulate and defend the faith, I think it's smart for you to avoid doing so, or just not avoid doing so. I think that's going too far. But be careful. Be careful. The word is circumspect. Like, watch where you're going, and realize that the topics that these people raise, discussions that they try to get into, lines of reasoning that they try to initiate, they've probably got prepared arguments ready, and they're sort of baiting you into saying something where they're going to get you trapped. So you've got to be circumspect and make sure you watch where you're walking if you do get into those discussions. So anyway, I wanted to share that just because it was fresh, and maybe something in that could be helpful. But please do study and engage in these discussions. Again, not because you're going to make everyone change their mind, but because it's good exercise for you to, even for your own thinking, to get into these issues, see where these arguments go, see what new issues open up as you discuss these things, and keep these things written down or journaled somewhere, because over time it allows you to gain experience in these discussions, and you can make these arguments and progress through them more and more efficiently, which also lends a certain ethos to your discussions. So anyway, I wanted to share those things because I thought the discussion was helpful. If you want to see the discussion, if you just go on Twitter, the discussion was on Twitter. If you go on Twitter and go to my account and, on my profile, look at the discussion, you'll find the discussion on that video about this mother talking about her transgender child. And you can follow through, you can read through the whole discussion, which I think is pretty interesting reading. So you can do that if you want. But anyway, I hope that's helpful. If there's any points that you'd like to discuss about this, or if you've encountered any different arguments or different lines of reasoning that you'd like to unpack a little bit, let me know, and we'll do that. I hope that's helpful. God bless.